Most artificial intelligence algorithms are tested on data provided by researchers.
Another report that showed with self-driving cars.
I think it's totally true in 2019. I use AI when I'm taking photos on my iPhone, when I'm watching videos on YouTube.
So where it might take a human days to be able to find a diagnosis.
And this is a case where it's actually very troubling.
Is the new and revolutionary force in the world, artificial intelligence, perpetuating racism against people of color. What does this mean for the future? Let's dive right in. Racist facial recognition systems. There is a huge and troubling AI defect that should give everyone pause. Many are still subtly perpetuating, or worse, enhancing, the biases of the mostly white male creators. Rather than transcend our human limitations to create a more equitable future for everyone, AI tools often inadvertently repeat the same mistakes and lapses in judgment, allowing racism and discrimination to fester throughout our society today.
Artificial intelligence, once a vision of the future, the potential of new technology. Joy Buolamwini has been researching prejudice in tech.
So this is the experience I had that kind of started it all.
Yeah.
Until I put on
the white mask on.
Yes, the white mask, right? And so different examples of iconic women.
There are many sobering examples of the harm that AI can cause. In 2018, MIT student Joy Buolamwini wrote about her experience discovering that the facial recognition algorithms in her lab, used all over the world, couldn't detect black faces. She even had to wear a white mask to get the computer to recognize her as a person. Similarly, she discovered in 2020 that Twitter's image cropping tool constantly focused on white faces. Some mistakes are graver than omissions. AI robots trained on billions of images consistently identified women as homemakers and people of color as criminals or janitors. In a 2019 panel conversation on these issues, Harvard professor Latanya Sweeney talked about, in her son's words, the day her computer was racist. As she was showing some work to a colleague, search engines served up ads for tools to expunge her non-existent jail records, based solely on her African-American sounding name. These engines, she noted, routinely push predatory credit lending on those with black-sounding names too. Medical algorithms failing. When it comes to our health, it's personal. That's why it's so important that the physicians we trust make decisions about our care, not machines. And yet in many situations, even related to medicine, artificial intelligence and machine learning are making decisions about our medical treatment and care, often to the disadvantage of communities of color. Medical algorithms are expected to make quick, precise decisions that help providers diagnose and treat patients faster and more efficiently. Their use began primarily in the 1970s, and from this point on, algorithms and AI have become constants in patients' lives. From consultation programming to glaucoma to automated intake processes in primary care to scoring systems that evaluate newborns' health conditions, patients regularly encounter these technologies and algorithms, whether they know it or not. Insurance companies use algorithms as well to determine risk and adjust the cost of care. Despite their ubiquity, medical algorithms' fatal flaw is that they're often built on biased rules and homogeneous datasets that do not reflect the patient population at large. Patients should never have to worry that an algorithm could prevent them from receiving an organ transplant. Yet this is the reality for many black patients on transplant lists. Even though black Americans are 4 times more likely to have kidney failure, an algorithm to determine transplant list placement reportedly puts black patients lower on the list than white patients, even when all other factors remain identical.
Read another report that showed with self-driving cars, it was less accurate on darker-skinned individuals. As I started looking at the data sets, I learned that for some of the largest...
This week, San Francisco police issued a ban on facial recognition technology in policing.
This is a problem that is going to be with us continually as long as these technologies, is it has the ability to look at patterns and understand our own behavior.
Medical algorithms have an impact outside of the healthcare sphere as well. For example, the NFL has actively employed biased algorithms that use race-norming tactics to determine which players are eligible for payouts in a $1 billion settlement of brain injury claims. These algorithms are based on a discriminatory assumption that black players start with a lower cognitive function, which then disqualifies them, injured from years of concussions, from receiving payouts. Race-based adjustments such as these were developed in the early 1990s to estimate the impact of socioeconomic factors on a person's health. But neurology experts have found that the NFL's assessment program is flawed, systematically discriminating against black players. In fact, a 2019 study found that risk prediction algorithms led to black patients receiving less quality care than their non-black counterparts. The algorithm used the patient's previous healthcare spending to determine future risks, and thus the need for extra care. Since black Americans have one of the highest poverty rates in the US and have reduced access to services, they tend to spend less on healthcare.
The thing that I think confused a lot of people early on, massive records and make massive decisions. The products are really around that, finding things in large quantity.
This caused the algorithm to disqualify black patients from receiving extra care through a high-risk care management program, despite the fact that black Americans possess the highest cancer demise rate, have 5 times the likelihood of demise from pregnancy-related causes, and are 60% more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes when compared to white Americans. Black Americans spend less on healthcare, not because of less need, but because of fewer resources. Yet insurance companies misuse personal information such as race and income in risk prediction algorithms to manipulate healthcare costs and raise premiums. Under the Medicare Advantage program, insurers abused risk scoring algorithms and overcharged Medicare nearly $30 billion. Many biased algorithms also lack data diversity, whether by race, gender, or other factors. This is nothing new. Medical data has long lacked diversity. Since the early days of clinical trials, women and people of color have been underrepresented in studies. The lack of diverse data diminishes the generalizability of these studies and potentially of the tools developed using the data. This will directly result in the miscare and complete lack of regard for patients of color.
Enable us to see our own behaviour, to understand the weaknesses in our own behaviour, to ensure that it benefits society and benefits all of us.
I truly believe that AI has great potential, and I think of it like fire.
Social algorithm bias. With AI creeping into social media platforms, there is racial bias slowly emerging in their practices too. Platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter are banking on developing artificial intelligence technology to help stop the spread of hateful speech on their networks. The idea is that complex algorithms that use natural language processing will flag racist or violent speech faster and better than human beings possibly can. Doing this effectively is more urgent than ever in light of recent mass shootings and violence linked to hate speech online. But 2 new studies show that AI trained to identify hate speech may actually end up amplifying racial bias. In one study, researchers found that leading AI models for processing hate speech were 1.5 times more likely to flag tweets as offensive or hateful when they were written by African Americans, and 2.2 times more likely to flag tweets written in African American English, which is commonly spoken by black people in the US, which is often proposed as a tool to objectively identify offensive language, can amplify the same biases that human beings have. They also prove how the test data that feeds these algorithms has baked-in bias from the start. No one knows for sure if the content moderation systems that Facebook, Twitter, and Google use show exactly the same biases in these studies. The technology these companies use to moderate content is proprietary. But the tech giants often turn to academics for guidance on how to better enforce standards around hate speech. So if top researchers are finding flaws in widely used academic datasets, that presents a significant problem for the tech industry at large. Anecdotally, activists have for some time accused platforms like Facebook of policing the speech of black Americans more strictly than that of white Americans. In one notable case in 2017 by Reveal News, a black woman was banned from Facebook for posting the same Dear White People note that many of her white friends posted without suffering any consequences. But these experiments provided quantitative data to suggest that these actions are not isolated incidents, but are instead emblematic of a wider issue in how offensive content is policed on social media.
It's the emotion and how it moves, the emotion that you get out of the face. Suddenly that just, and we were incredibly surprised that overnight. So incredible response.
Flawed human decisions. Martin Sapp, a PhD student in computer science and engineering, and his colleagues at the University of Washington set out to study what's flagged as offensive on Twitter because of the important political conversations that happen on the platform. They first gathered more than 100,000 tweets used in 2 widely cited academic datasets. These tweets have been hand-flagged by human beings with labels such as hate speech, offensive, or hurtful. The results were astounding. Tweets written by self-identified African American users were, on average, found to be 1.5 times more likely to be flagged as offensive. Researchers then applied this test data to a larger algorithmic model run using natural language processing on 56 million tweets and saw that these biases were only further reinforced. Taking their research a step further, Sapp and his colleagues decided to do something interesting. They primed workers, labeling the same data to think about the user's dialect and race when deciding whether the tweet was offensive or not.
I started by asking him what issues they're dealing with in the United States.
Have started using machine learning systems to make, and this is a case where it's actually very troubling because the data they use, we know that depending on your race in the United States, you're stopped.
Their results showed that when moderators knew more about the person tweeting, they were significantly less likely to label that tweet as potentially offensive. At the aggregate level, racial bias against tweets associated with black speech decreased by 11%. The researchers and others have advocated for giving moderators more social context about the people writing tweets, but that can prove tricky. When Facebook's content moderation guidelines are already under scrutiny, would giving moderators more context open the door for more criticism, particularly from conservatives? And when content moderators at Facebook and other companies are reportedly working under grueling conditions and are pressured to rate content as offensive or not, making more nuanced decisions could make a difficult job even harder. Nevertheless, these studies crack open the fantasy that AI will be able to rescue tech companies from making the complex decisions needed to police hateful speech on their platforms. These algorithms may seem like an easy solution to a complex problem, but they can have unintended consequences. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.